With Deion Sanders leaving Jackson State, you might have forgot. They actually won a SWAC championship on Saturday, and we are going to break that game down in addition to the MEAC Offensive and Defensive Players of the Year. Oh yeah, it's Locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked on HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked on HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor. Thank you for going on this journey with me, making Locked on HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn, which you can see right up here. That's the wrong side. Listen, I'm used to all my graphics kind of being on my right. So when I had to switch over sides, it was a little bit like, But yes, it's brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. They can help you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to and need to talk to faster. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions do apply. And we're going to talk about them a little bit later. But it brings me great peace and great solace to finally talk about the actual Jackson State game that happened on Saturday. There was so much fanfare, so much noise, so much upheaval and just discussion about Deion Sanders leaving for Colorado. There was no way we weren't going to open up with that this week, but it did kind of overshadow the outcome on the field. It did kind of overshadow everything that was happening. Now, I thought it would have overshadowed it going into the game, but the actual coverage of the game until about the end of the fourth quarter, it was pretty good. I don't actually feel like the veil of Deion Sanders possibly leaving, we kind of knew it was happening, but him possibly leaving, I don't really feel like it hung over this game throughout the duration of it. It wasn't until the very end when the game was kind of secure that you start talking about, hey, are we hopeful he's going to stay? Is he going to come out and disprove the rumors? And then you look at him and you could tell it was going to be true. He was leaving. You could kind of just tell in his demeanor it was going to be gone, or he was going to be gone. But this was still overshadowed after the fact with how he left, everything. And I'm guilty of it. It's Wednesday and we're just now breaking down our game of the week. Now, I could have shoved it into a topic yesterday and just made it full Jackson State back-to-back days. But the reason I didn't do that is because these players and this team and the success that they had deserved way better than to just be the second and third segments of a Deion Sanders-led episode. Mind you, I know it's 3 segments, but the lead segment is typically the one that gets the most attention. They deserve better than that. They deserve to stand alone. Their achievement deserved to not be attached to their coach leaving. That wasn't what they deserved, so I'm going to give them their just due. And with that comes them leading our Wednesday episode. And I want to talk about how resilience is the theme of Jackson State on Saturday. I thought it was shown before the game, and I thought it was also shown mid-game. Both of those existed. And listen, I'm not going to get overly sappy. I promise you not. I'm not going to get sappy at all, but I am talking about resilience and how they're able to bounce back. But we're going to get to the X's and O's later. So I want to talk about it because going into the game, one of the matchups that I had was the Jackson State team versus the Noise. And I wanted to see how were they going to block it out? How were they going to open up the game? Well, when you look at how they opened up the game, it was absolutely fantastic. They dominated from the jump. The beginning quarter, all Jackson State. And that eliminated any idea in my head that they possibly were affected by the Noise. If anything, they might have been motivated by the Noise, So for me, that was something that I was watching immediately. But then there's a shift within the game, and when Jackson State started to lose a little bit of momentum, and I don't think that was I don't think that could be attached to the noise from outside at all. I think that just had to do with the ebbs and flows of a football game. But you needed to show resilience then. You need to be able to bounce back from hearing your coach is going to leave you a million times leading up into the game. Mind you, the news broke the day before that he was basically in Colorado. I think it was either calling recruits or putting together a coaching staff, if not both. That can really affect your psyche. You had to react. You had to bounce back. You had to be resilient. Now you come into the game, you dominate, but then you start to lose a little bit of momentum, and then you have to bounce back again. Now, Glendon McDaniel, who we're going to talk about in our second segment, he's starting to put some things together. That Southern defense is starting to put some things together. How are you going to answer? How are you going to retaliate? This is what I see. I see a Southern team that started to gain a little bit of momentum, but Jackson State is the better team, 100%. They had to show it, and that resilience was shown in the second half. In the third quarter, it was the offense. In the fourth quarter, it was the defense. Now, after getting out to a 26-0 lead to start the game in the first quarter, you seen them go a little bit cold. They scored in this first possession of the second half, Jackson State did. After that, they didn't score for the rest of the half. They didn't score in their first possession of the second half. Then they rattle off a field goal and a touchdown, and those 10 points was a nice answer back, and it was like, okay, we settled. We're good. We're here. And I thought that it was important because had they not scored and Southern just kept up their momentum without any kind of really resistance, now we're looking at a situation where this game is extremely tight. It never got really tight. It got closer than I thought, and we'll talk about that. I'm trying not to get ahead of myself. But it would have gotten really tight had Jackson State's offense not offered that third quarter resistance. Now for the fourth quarter, the Jackson State defense, that's when they turned it on. That's when they had 2 interceptions. That's when they finally got back to playing Jackson State football defensively. And for me, that was a really impactful time because, yes, the offense was able to give a little bit of resistance, but the defense stopped all the momentum. See, defensive momentum is good. But unless you're scoring like Southern did versus Grambling in the Bayou Classic, there's kind of a cap on how much defensive momentum can change your game. Because if you're down and you're just stopping the opposing offense, if your offense doesn't score, it's relatively irrelevant, right? So I thought it was just a lot of resilience. On the field, in the middle of the game, you had to answer back because momentum was starting to slip. You had to answer back, and you did it on both sides of the ball, though it was in different quarters. It kind of made for a halfway complete second half. And then also all of the noise and being knocked down and telling your coach is leaving, that couldn't have been easy. That had to be rough. Matter of fact, screw not being easy. That had to be rough. But you still bounced back, and you had a strong start. And in the second half, when things were going wrong, you had a strong finish. Resilience is the theme. They were able to show their resilience pregame, mid-game, and that is the reason why Jackson State won the SWAC championship. Enough of the sappiness, enough of the heartstrings, and all of the good heartwarming stories. Yes, Jackson State was resilient, but the reason they had to be resilient mid-game is because of Glendon McDaniel. He turned this game absolutely around and actually started to give Southern some momentum, and it sustained for a little bit of time, and that's the only reason this game was not over at halftime. Let's break down these X's and O's as we continue with Locked On HBCU, but first, I would like to tell you about our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn, and let's go ahead and flash to it. Bam. You see how smooth that was? I got right to the graphic. None of the going to the right. And no, we right here, right? So let's go ahead and talk about LinkedIn. This is for my small business owners. Listen up. If you own a business or you're in need of a job, listen up. LinkedIn Jobs allows you to reach out to candidates that are most qualified for the job you actually want. Don't try to get a podcast host to build a house. It's not going to work. Right? No need for me to sit there in an interview and you actually find out, oh, this guy can't build a house. Go and look at the resumes of the applicants on LinkedIn and find out who does the job you need, whether it's building house, selling products, whatever it is. Who does that the best already by looking at the qualifications that they provide on their LinkedIn profile. So make sure you do that and use the purple hashtag hiring frame. You can post your job for free. Yes, no cost at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. As we continue rolling with today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making us your first listen of the day every single day. For your second listen of the day, do not switch apps. You can get this wherever you listen to your podcast. Locked On Sports Today with Peter Bukowski interviewing the local experts on all of the biggest stories nationwide. And today's word of the day is solace, meaning someone or something that gives a feeling of comfort to a person. It was very comforting to talk about Jackson State actually playing on the field. And we talked about how they were very resilient, and that's how they became your SWAC champions. But they also showed the ability they had to show the ability to be resilient because Glendon McDaniel came in and he shifted everything. This game was completely different between the first quarter or the beginning of the game and the end of the first quarter in the second through the fourth. Completely different games, and the biggest switch was the switch at quarterback. I thought this game was going to be over at halftime. I ain't lying to you. Thought this game was going to be over at halftime. I felt this way at the end of the first. It felt that way. It was 26-0. Jackson State had already attempted two 2-point conversions, and they completed both of them successfully. It felt like they were rolling. And you have to understand, this is the second time that Southern and Jackson State faced off. The first time, Southern was blown out 35-0. So it just felt like it was more of the same. It was, man, this game is going to be over. I've done it before. I did it with, I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say the game, but y'all know. I've done it where I've just typed it up at halftime. Sometimes a story can be told in a simple half. And I thought that was going to be the case, and it looked like it was going to be until they turned to Glendon McDaniel at the quarterback position. I don't blame Coach Dooley for rocking with Bishawn McCray at the beginning of the game. I really do not blame him at all. Right? It doesn't help that he had a bad game. It doesn't help that he had a bad couple of drives because he didn't even play the whole game. It doesn't help that he started off very poorly. And in hindsight, yes, they should have rocked with Glendon McDaniel from the jump. I understand that. However, you don't have hindsight, and you're going with your guy. He's been your guy all year long. I think the one place where Dooley kind of made a mistake is McCray starts the game. And the best drive of the game before McDaniel comes in was a Dooley 3-and-out. And that's because there was no turnovers. It's the only drive in which they actually got to punt the football. After that, it was interception, fumble. And I think here's the problem. McCray threw an interception. He was taken out. The backup, Blood, came in. He fumbled. And I think that's when you're supposed to go to McDaniel. But instead, you go back to McCray. And McCray fumbles. And now you have 3 turnovers, and that leads to the 26-0 lead that Jackson State built. Jackson State scored on their first 5 possessions. And 3 of those possessions came on the backs of an interception or a fumble. So whatever the turnover was, that's 3 scoring drives off the back of a turnover. You can't have that, you know? Now you insert Glendon McDaniel, everything changes. It's 26-0 at that point. Southern actually outscores Jackson State for the rest of the game. Shocking. And this is a stout Jackson State defense who hasn't allowed 24 defensive or offensive points all year long. They have not allowed that, right? The Grambling game, they scored over 20, but that was a defensive touchdown by Grambling. But the defense of Jackson State has not allowed 20 points to any offense all year long. They gave that to Glendon McDaniel in a matter of 2 quarters. Everything was rolling. Everything was going. It felt even like the defense started playing better. They started to have an idea of what they needed to do, especially in the second quarter, in the beginning of the third, even in the midway through the third, they allowed a field goal instead of a touchdown. I don't think that would have been the case earlier in the game. This was just a significantly better performance once Glendon McDaniel came in, and it's crazy. You know, I wonder what would have happened had they just realized this was the guy earlier. Once again, hindsight is 20/20. I'm not asking you to start McDaniel. It would have been nice, but I'm not asking you to do it. Maybe if you realized a couple of possessions in, maybe after that first McCray interception, you say, you know what? I've seen enough. I'm going to go ahead and go with McDaniel because he was safe with the ball. He had 2 interceptions later in the game in the fourth quarter, but that wasn't until I feel like, I could be just guessing, but it felt like they were pressing at that point because they said, you know what, we need to get some points. We're down 19 points going into the fourth quarter. We have to press. We have to. And when you have that idea, you're more prone to making mistakes because you have to. That's not exactly playing your most smart football, but it's playing more desperately, right? And when I say the spark was all the way through, that goes for the defense. They started making plays. I think they even forced a turnover at one point. It was just a complete shift, and it was a tone shift. You felt it. So it wasn't just, the wide receivers are making plays. Glendon McDaniel had 3 big plays, man. He had 3 really big throws. I'm not even talking about runs. He had 3 big throws. 2 of them were on Travis Hunter. Those are 2 of the better plays of the day. I said, all right, he can slang it. And the wide receiver was able to go up and get it. I was talking to a friend of mine. I said, man, I am putting that on my highlight reel immediately. That's the first play, and it probably is the last play, just in case you forgot. Yeah, I did that on the number 1 recruit in the country. I did it. Ain't no big deal. But it was really good job of putting it where your receiver could get it, and then also just understanding the strengths of your wide receiver and allowing them to high point that ball. It was a good play on both sides, right? But this game is so much better than I expected. I'm so thankful that Glendon McDaniel was here. I wish he would have started, even though I don't fault Dooley for not starting him. I wish he would have started just because I would have liked to known if he would have made those early mistakes. If he doesn't make those early mistakes, it's going to be much harder for Jackson State to score. They still could have done it because they have a good offense. However, it would have been much more difficult for them to score had they not had to score off of turnovers. And maybe Glendon McDaniel protects the ball a little bit better. Now, of course, they did figure him out in the fourth quarter, but like I said, I think that had a little bit to do with the desperation aspect of everything. Glendon McDaniel made this a game. And because of that, we have our first 2 segments. We have Glendon McDaniel and how he shifted the matchup, but then also how Jackson State had to be resilient mid-game. It's a trickle-down effect. Is that a sensitive subject? I don't know. But I would have continued rolling, and we're going to go ahead and switch gears, and we're going to talk about the MEAC because they have announced their offensive and defensive players of the year. Before I get into that, however, I want to tell you about BetOnline because BetOnline is the number 1 place for all of your sports wagering needs. If you want to talk about football, and please don't talk to me too much about football. My Saints are struggling. If you want to talk about basketball, we can talk about that because my Pelicans are rising. If you want to talk about college football with all of the bowl games, you want to talk about the World Cup, we can do all of those things, but we can put money down on it if we go down with BetOnline. Now, here's the thing. BetOnline is very versatile. They're going to give you the best odds, the props, and they're going to give you news to make sure that you're making educated decisions. All of these reasons are reasons that I absolutely adore and love BetOnline. They are the fastest and the easiest way to wager on all of your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. As wrapping up today's episode of Locked on HBCU, we have our offensive and defensive player of the year for the MEAC. Davius Richard and Khalil Baker are your offensive and defensive players of the year, and it's the first time since 2005 that the same school has won both of these awards. Now, in addition to that, they also won the Coach of the Year. They also won the Offensive Lineman of the Year, and that's only the second time in MEAC history that one school has won all 4 of those superlatives. That's what I'm looking at. I'm like, man, North Carolina Central, they really winning on and off the field. This is great. They have great success on the field, winning the conference, but then also off the field, you're getting the individual accomplishments. It's all following. It's all success-based. Now, let's continue rolling. Let's continue rocking. Davius Richard is no surprise. He led the conference in touchdowns through the air, touchdowns on the ground, passing yards. He led the best offense, scoring 38 points a game. That's not something you see often. This is a no-brainer. I was just waiting for Dr. Stills to say his name. So I don't even feel like we need to discuss that. It's clear who has been the best quarterback in this conference, and you knew he was going to win it. He led the best team. He was the best player. He deserves this. And then that defensive player of the year. That's when people kind of started scratching their chin. They're like, I don't know. I don't know who's it going to be. Davius Richard was an easy choice. But now he's like, who's it going to be? To me, it was a 3-man race. You had BJ Davis out of South Carolina State. You had Elijah Williams out of Morgan State. And then also the eventual victor, Khalil Baker, out of North Carolina Central. I'm going to tell you who I thought I would have given it to, just to be honest. But then also I want to say all 3 of these players, if they got it, it ain't no slight. Like, it shouldn't have been a surprise. And it's not a slight to the others. To me, when I watch what they do, when I see the stats that they put up on this year, the only one that I kind of took out, and it's not fair, but I took him out quickly because I had to do process of elimination. They're really close. I took out Elijah Williams because he wasn't up for the Buck Buchanan Award. And that national recognition, I felt like, even if it's just a gut feeling, I felt like it was going to kind of dictate how this award went. Even though they didn't do that for the SWAC. The SWAC Freshman of the Year went to Kevin Coleman, but Adrian Maddox is actually a Jerry Rice Award finalist. So he could win the best freshman in the country, but he didn't even win best freshman in his conference. And Coleman was not on the list for the Jerry Rice Award. So it doesn't always, co-sign and kind of go together, but for me, that's kind of how I was looking at it. And he led the conference in sacks in tackles for a loss, being Elijah Williams. He led the conference in those stats by a pretty good margin. And I think that deserves a lot of love, and that's why he was in the race. But just that national acclaim that he didn't quite get made me feel like he wasn't going to get it. BJ Davis and Khalil Baker, they were both there. I'll be honest with you. I'm a huge BJ Davis fan. Like, I really like his game. I love how he flies around. I like his coverage skills. I love everything about him as a player, right? And I was talking to somebody. I ain't gonna say no names, but I was talking to somebody just about BJ Davis, and we had a little bit of difference of opinion on his tackling skills. I do know that sometimes he can be a little up and down. That guy I was talking to thought he was just bad, but I'm a big fan of BJ Davis, and if you can't tell, I would have given him the award. Let me tell you why. They both had fantastic seasons, and I can't complain. And I think one of the reasons that Baker got it is because he was on a very successful team, and his play led to more impacts. I would probably say he might have had the more impactful plays, even though the stats, in my opinion, do favor BJ Davis. So Baker was second in interceptions. He was second in total pass defended, which is pass breakups and interceptions combined. BJ Davis was first in both of those. He obviously had more tackles. He's a linebacker compared to a defensive back. Had more tackles for a loss. Linebacker compared to a defensive back. They both had one touchdown. Both had a fumble. One was a fumble recovery in the form of Baker, but then a forced fumble for Davis. It's like, they kind of neck and neck. But I just kind of gave it to Davis because, I'm a huge fan. I'm a linebacker. I'm kind of linebacker biased. But, man, when I tell you that Khalil Baker had himself a year, this is a player who came in and he had a lot of high-profile matchups. He had to be on the island. He's the guy who had to be the man locking down the number one corner. And I really feel like he rose to the occasion most times, So, to me, and that touchdown I want to mention came against New Hampshire, which was the number 25 team in the nation at the time. Sometimes when you do, it matters. All of Davis's interceptions came in 3 games. He had 2 games with 2 picks. So maybe it's the sprinkle, around more than just the high spikes, I'll say. Maybe that's what they prefer. And I can't knock it. I think that's a great reason. And that's the reason, I think that Khalil Baker did deserve a Defensive Player of the Year. But this was a hot and hotly contested race. Man, I don't know who it could have been. Elijah Williams, BJ Davis, or the eventual victor, Khalil Baker. Congratulations to all 3 of these guys because they did indeed deserve it. And tomorrow's episode, we're going to be talking about how I believe the SWAC should go to 1 division. Forget 2 divisions splitting up between the East and the West. 1 conference, no division. Put the 2 best teams in the conference championship. So that's what you can look forward to on tomorrow's episode. Now, for your second listen of the day, make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today with Peter Bukowski and all of the local experts that he brings onto the show. In the meantime, in between time, if you're looking for me, you can find me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.